Welcome back to CBS News 24/7, where at this hour we look at your headlines. This man, accused of attempting to assassinate President Donald Trump, is in a Florida federal courtroom today for a status hearing. So this was the second attempt on the president's life. Ryan Ralph found hiding inside shrubs, holding a rifle near Trump's golf club in West Palm Beach. They caught him in time. Ralph's trial, as of now, is set for the month of September. Our crew's watching in that community. This was the moment that police arrested him. An active duty U.S. Army soldier charged with selling military secrets to China. So these are just some of the items authorities say a battery supply sergeant sold to co-conspirators working on behalf of China. The items are a military computer, 20 classified hard drives. The Army soldier charged with conspiring to obtain and transmit national defense information. Also, along with bribery, theft of government property. Well, did you hear about this? There's a $10 million reward for information leading to the arrest of this man. If he looks familiar, that's because if you're a sports fan, especially a fan of the Olympics, you likely recognize him. That is former Olympic snowboarder from Canada, Ryan Wedding. He's wanted for allegations of running a multinational drug trafficking network and orchestrating multiple murders related to the drug ring. There he is on surveillance photos. The FBI has now, in response, added him to its 10 most wanted list. Let's look live at the White House right now, where we are listening in as President Donald Trump moments ago took questions.
It's important to even talk about them. It'll save us a lot of money, but we don't want that. We want education to be given. So you go to Iowa and Indiana and Idaho and all these places that are so well run. They're going to be producing education that will be the equivalent of, like Denmark is one, and Norway, Sweden. Actually, China is one of the better in terms of education, and so we can't blame size anymore. You know, China has 1.4 billion people, but they're very high on their list. So one thing we're doing well on, we're number one on the list, is cost per pupil. We spend more money than any other country in the world by far. So I jokingly say the one thing we do well on is the cost. We spend more money, and yet we're toward the bottom of the list. Yeah.
Mr. President, I want to ask you, the joint address, millions of Americans watched your joint address earlier this week, where you warned that there could be a little disturbance that Americans could feel as a function of these taxes, these tariffs. How much disturbance are you willing to accept in the near term as a function of that? And to set expectations, how long should Americans expect things to cost a bit more?
Well, so far, Peter, there hasn't been very much, because these numbers are coming out. We're here for just a little over 4 weeks. And these are fantastic numbers. I was watching some of the reports this morning. They were surprised. There could be some disturbance, a little bit of disturbance. I solved a little bit of that because I have respect for our auto companies, and I gave them a little bit of a 1-month reprieve because it was unfair, although I'm sure they'll take advantage of it. I see they're driving a lot of cars into the U.S. to try and avoid the tariffs, and taking advantage of it a little bit. But they called me, they asked me, they said, could they have a little bit of help? And I decided, they're American companies, USMCA, and I let them have that. But this really kicks in, the reciprocals, kicks in on, let's see, I guess the 2nd. And I wanted it to be the 1st so badly. It just didn't want to be on April Fool's Day. So I made it the 2nd. That's going to cost a lot of money. That one day is going to cost a lot of money, but that's okay. But I don't see it. I don't see anything. I see good reports. I think we're going to have good numbers from the beginning. Now, globalists won't love this because this brings jobs back to America. So if they're coming back to America, maybe you'll lose some in other parts of the world. But the other parts of the world have done very well, and they'll continue to do very well. But I think the United States is going to be doing record business. We'll bring a lot of those 90,000 factories that have been lost over the last number of years. It's been, it's hard to believe. 90,000, think of what 90,000 is. 90,000 plants and factories are gone. We're going to bring back many of those plants and factories.
One day the tariffs are on, the next day they're off. Right now the markets, as you know well, prefer stability. Are you done going forward with the pauses and the carve-outs? Is that it for those?
There'll always be changes and adjustments, and you can't just. I could have, for instance, told the American car companies, no, I'm not going to give you anything, and then you wouldn't have had to say, well, they're getting a little extra. It's just a little bit of a 1-month reprieve. They're very happy about what's happening. They won't have to go across borders, and you see the zigzagging. You have a fender made in Canada, you have something else made in Mexico. We don't want that. We want it made here. But there'll always be some modifications. I mean, if you have a wall in front of you, sometimes you have to go around the wall instead of through it. But I think very little. I think very little. On occasion, if we can do something, we want to help companies. We want to help companies create jobs. So I could have left that, and you wouldn't have had a minor change. Instead, I was asked by the real majors, the big majors, if they could do this, and I said, yeah, I'll do it. I want you to produce a lot of jobs. And numerous of the people, actually all of the people I spoke to have already been, they're very much on the way to already doing it. That's why you have auto jobs increase. And the man, I don't know him, Sean Fain, I don't know him, and I did great, as you know, with the auto workers, with the Teamsters, with unions. I did fantastically well, best numbers ever by a Republican. And I have a lot of respect for those people. But Sean Fain, who I don't know, but wasn't a supporter, although the auto workers were big supporters. I watched him last night, and he said Donald Trump is absolutely right on tariffs. He said what he's doing on tariffs is an incredible thing, and it's about time somebody had the guts to do it, because we're going to save auto manufacturing. And I said to people when I was campaigning, you're going to have so many auto jobs, you're not going to believe what's going to happen. We're going to load up Michigan. I won the state of Michigan, as you know. And part of the reason I won it was I got a lot of auto workers that voted for me, Detroit, et cetera. But I think people are going to be very surprised. Yes?
Thank you, Mr. President. You mentioned in your remarks chips manufacturing, how a significant percentage is now in Taiwan. You also mentioned it in your address to Congress. And you called on Congress to overturn the CHIPS Act, which had bipartisan support in the last Congress. Why would you like to see this particular law overturned, Mr. President?
Because it's hundreds of billions of dollars, and it's just a waste of money. Now, some people have already taken the money and used it. Actually, it's very hard to qualify because they go by race, they go by gender, they go by all sorts of things. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. You won't be able to find those people. So I don't even think anybody can qualify. They have so many different categories in order to qualify. You have to have so many of a certain race, a certain gender, a certain this, a certain, and I don't think they can qualify, but if they take the money, they better qualify because they'll be watching them. But it's a tremendous waste of money. I didn't give the greatest chip company in the world, one of the greatest companies, I didn't give them 10 cents. They came here because of tariffs, because they didn't want to pay the tariffs. And they also came here because they like the results of the election, because they know that I'm very pro-business and pro-jobs. I mean, I'm pro-business, not for business sake. I'm pro-business because of jobs, because business is producing the jobs. Okay?
Russia, if I may, President Putin is bombing Ukraine.
Yeah.
Do you still believe him when he tells you that he wants peace?
Yeah, no, I believe him. I believe him. I think we're doing very well with Russia. But right now they're bombing the hell out of Ukraine, and I'm finding it more difficult, frankly, to deal with Ukraine. And they don't have the cards. They don't have the cards. As you know, we're meeting in Saudi Arabia on sometime next week, early. And we're talking, I find that in terms of getting a final settlement, it may be easier dealing with Russia, which is surprising because they have all the cards. I mean, they're bombing the hell out of them right now. And I put a statement in, a very strong statement. Can't do that. You can't do that.
Mr. President.
We're trying to help them. And Ukraine has to get on the ball and get a job done. Michael, could you come up here? I see Michael back there. Good. I'm glad. He's traveling all over the world. I just saw him come in the door. Could you give a little definition of what's going on, please?
Sure. Well, the president has been crystal clear, and he's been clear to all sides. The fighting has to stop. Both sides need to get to the table. We had a good engagement. Both leaders have said only President Trump could do so, and only he has been able to do so. We had an initial engagement with the Russians. The Ukrainians had a great opportunity to bind our economies together through that mineral deal. Unfortunately, that didn't go so well, but we think we're going to get things back on track. Secretary Rubio, myself, and the Ukrainian delegation will be meeting in Saudi Arabia next week to get these talks back on track, get the ceasefire in place, and drive peace home under President Trump's leadership.
President, you put out
I think both parties want to settle. I think if I wasn't president, this war would have had no chance of settlement, zero chance. But I think we're going to get it settled and stopped. We got to stop. They're losing on average 2,000 soldiers a week. That's a lot of soldiers. Do you agree, Peter?
It's a lot of soldiers on both sides, I agree. Do you, Mr. President, think that Vladimir Putin is taking advantage of the U.S. pause right now on intelligence and military aid to Ukraine?
No, I actually think he's doing what anybody else would do. I think he wants to get it stopped and settled, and I think he's hitting them harder than he's been hitting them. And I think probably anybody in that position would be doing that right now. He wants to get it ended, and I think Ukraine wants to get it ended, but I don't see it's crazy. They're taking tremendous punishment. I don't quite get it, but I suspect, Michael, he probably wants to get it ended.
He does, Mr. President. The Russians are taking incredible losses on the front. As the President has said, this is a meat grinder of people, of material, of national treasure, and no one else has any solutions except to let this war continue forever. But I'll add, the President has had multiple conversations and a visit from President Macron of France, Prime Minister Starmer of the United Kingdom. We have the NATO Secretary General coming next week. We have this meeting with the Ukrainians. We've had it with the Russians. All of this in the President's first month in his leadership. We will engage in the shuttle diplomacy, and we will continue to use his leadership and what leverage we have to get both sides of the peace table. It's not going to be easy, but President Trump.
This war should have never happened. It would have never happened if I were president, but it did happen. So a lot of other things shouldn't have happened, too. We shouldn't have 21 million people pouring into our country through open borders, many of whom are criminals, very bad criminals, including murderers, thousands of murderers. Many killed, far more than one person, and they're roaming our streets. But Tom Holman and Kristi Noem are doing an incredible job, and we're getting them out of here. And we'll get them out. We'll get them all out. But all these things shouldn't have happened. We shouldn't have inflation. We shouldn't have had this horrible inflation where the prices have gone up. Look at eggs. So we're doing a good job. We're doing a good job.
President, in regards to the pause on military assistance to Ukraine, you put out on your social media post today that Russia is pounding Ukraine.
That's right.
Why not provide Ukraine with air defenses? And what happens, Mr. President, when Ukraine runs out of...
Well, because good question. Because I have to know that they want to settle. I don't know that they want to settle. If they don't want to settle, we're out of there because we want them to settle. And I'm doing it to stop death, more important than anything else. Secondarily, way down the line is the money. So we're in for $350 billion, and Europe is in for $100 billion. They should be in for the same or more than us. And, you know, I watched over the last week or so what's going on in Europe. This thing could end up in World War III if we don't get it settled. This could really end up in a World War III. We got to get it settled.
So on Iran, how confident are you that the Iranians will negotiate with you? And is Israel on board with this outrage?
Yeah, I saw the hostages the other day. They came in, people that were not young, some young and some older, much older. And they gave, it was hard for them to do it, actually. They gave statements as to what happened. I was asking, what happened? How was it? I said, did you see anybody in there that was kind, like out of the hundreds of people that you were seeing, Hamas? Did some of them wink at you and say, don't worry, you're going to be okay, or give you a piece of bread, or no? I said, were there any people that were, like, kind? I was shocked. The answer was nobody. There was nobody. Just the opposite. They'd be slapped and punched. One man broke his ribs. He couldn't breathe for a month. It was brutal. I was so surprised. Could you think there'd be a couple of people that would be kind, that would say, you're going to be okay? But they had none of that. It's pretty amazing. Brian?
Thank you, Mr. President.
He's a kind person.
Well, according to...
Although not to Zelensky, he wasn't.
Well, you know what, that's another...
But to Trump, he's been good. Go ahead, Brian.
Nice tie, by the way. Look, we coordinated. Two questions. One on peace. Why don't you think any other European countries are offering a peace deal? It seems like no one's come to the table for peace except for you.
Yeah. It's a very good question. Sometimes questions aren't answerable. They're in a very unusual position. They don't know how to end the war. I think I do know how to end the war. Despite the Russia hoax, I've always had a good relationship with Putin. And, you know, he wants to end the war. He wants to end it. And I think he's going to be more generous than he has to be. And that's pretty good. That means a lot of good things. Because, frankly, you could have made a great deal if this war never started, you could have made a great deal. I don't know that anything would have had to be given up. This was not a war that was going to start, Brian. And it didn't start. For 4 years, somebody said, well, how do we know that? Well, for 4 years, it didn't start. I used to speak to Vladimir about it. I used to speak to him about it at length. It was the apple of his eye, but there was no way he was going in. And he knew, there were going to be consequences. But it did start. I mean, think of what happened. Inflation, you have the war with Ukraine and Russia, that wouldn't have happened. October 7th would have never happened. Israel, they had no money. Iran had no money. Iran was stone cold broke, and now they have a lot of money. And that's going to be the next thing you'll be talking about is Iran. What's going to happen with Iran? And there'll be some interesting days ahead. That's all I can tell you. We're down to final strokes with Iran. That's going to be an interesting time. And we'll see what happens. But we're down to the final moments. We're at final moments. Can't let them have a nuclear weapon. I think that I would have had a deal within 1 month after the rigged election of 2020. They were all set to make a deal. And then when I lost, they saw this person who's a stupid person, very stupid person. And they said, let's not make a deal. And they were right. He took the sanctions off. They became rich under Biden. They went from having no money to having $300 billion. All in a short period. It's oil. Oil builds up fast. It's a nice living if you have a nice oil well. And they do. They have a lot of nice oil wells, right? So anyway, it's going to be a big thing. It's an interesting time in the history of the world. But we have a situation with Iran that something's going to happen very soon. Very, very soon. You'll be talking about that pretty soon, I guess. And hopefully we can have a peace deal. I'm not speaking out of strength or weakness. I'm just saying I'd rather see a peace deal than the other. But the other will solve the problem.
Mr. President, your allies are calling on you to pardon Derek Chauvin. Are you considering pardoning Derek Chauvin?
No, I haven't even heard about it. No.
Mr. President, on peace.
I haven't heard that.
In the first term, you may recall, I broke the news that you were nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And the reason for that was the work that you led on the Abraham Accords. I spoke yesterday with the member of parliament, the Norwegian parliament, that nominated you. And he said what the Nobel Committee is looking for from you, Mr. President, is security guarantees for Ukraine. Is that a possibility, Mr. President?
So, before I even think about that, I want to settle the war, get it finished. Because if I'm not here, nobody's going to settle it. And President Macron has said that, and everybody said that, the prime ministers and presidents. We're pushing very hard. That's all I'm thinking about now. As far as the question about security later, that's the easy part. The hard part is getting it settled. We got to get them. We're losing 2,000 human beings every week. More than that, actually. 2,000 nice, young, although they're getting older because they're drafting much older now. In the case of one country, much older, because a lot of the young people have been killed. It's very sad, and I'd like to see if I could stop that. And I'd like to also see if we could stop making these massive payments from the United States. I mean, Biden gave away money like it was water.
All right, you have been listening to President Donald Trump moments ago in a wide-ranging conversation with members of the media on domestic and international issues, everything from Donald Trump's tariffs to what appears to be a first-name basis relationship with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. Let's bring in Elizabeth Cook now, who's going to continue our coverage here. It struck me something that the president said. He said that Russia will have to give up more than they should have to. That's striking to me to remember that Russia went in, annexed Crimea, and they were the ones who invaded Ukraine. It appears that the president may have a different view on that issue.
Yeah, it's an interesting stance, especially because today he sent out that post on Truth Social saying that there may be sanctions against Russia. So it's an interesting kind of dichotomy here, interesting relationship that we're going to dive into in this show. Reed, thanks so much.
Have a good Friday.
All right, you too. All right, let's continue this conversation with CBS News Chief White House correspondent Weijia Jiang. She is standing by for us at the White House. Weijia, remarkable press conference there in the Oval Office. What were the headlines for you?
Yeah, Trump always makes a ton of news of these things, and today was certainly no exception. So as you and Reed were just talking about, he did talk about the war in Ukraine after Russia invaded, and he said he still believes that Vladimir Putin wants peace there, even though he also said in almost the same sentence that, he is, quote, bombing the hell out of Ukraine. What's interesting is that the president went on to say that he finds it more difficult, frankly, to deal with Ukraine in peace talks. Of course, we all remember that Oval Office blow up that they had, and now both sides are trying to get things back on track, especially Zelensky, who has issued a public statement. We don't know, though, what Trump exactly is looking for from Ukraine to prove that it wants peace. And Liz, he also talked about the economy as we are locked in this trade war with Canada and Mexico and China. And you'll remember during his joint address to Congress, he said, look, there might be some disturbances in the meantime when it comes to tariffs, meaning that Americans might have to pay a little bit more. So he was asked how much of a disturbance and for how long. But one thing he hasn't talked about is, a money figure on how much the average American family might have to pay and for how long. But he did continue to defend why he's using these tariffs, saying that manufacturing is pouring back into the United States. We also know, Liz, that he said he will sign an executive order to dismantle the education department, but reiterated that they want to give more power and money to the states. But he hasn't committed to a time, Liz, for when that's happening. We have learned that that's because, of course, the Department of Education oversees billions and billions of dollars worth in student loans, and they have to find an off-ramp for that and fold it into another agency, likely Treasury.
Yeah, I was waiting to hear a little bit more about, I want to get back to Russia here in a second, but there was a letter to Iran from the president on nuclear deal negotiations. He referenced that in that press conference. What more do we know about it?
We know that the president wants to be viewed on the global stage as a peacemaker, as a deal maker in chief. And so to that end, he does believe that he can broker some kind of an agreement with Iran. During his first term, he actually came in and pulled out of the existing agreement that the U.S. and Iran were part of. But he did say in the Oval just now that hopefully we can have a peace deal. The president said, that he hopes something can happen, quote, pretty soon. And that he would have had a deal earlier, but he blamed President Biden for not moving that ball forward, Liz. As far as the details of what that deal could look like, we still don't know exactly what the president has in mind.
I also want to ask you about this meeting the president held with Elon Musk and key cabinet members yesterday. What happened there, and is this an indication that Trump could possibly be pulling back the reins on Musk?
So the president's message on that was that each department and agency head is going to have the ultimate say in terms of their staffing and their budget cuts, et cetera. And it did appear that he was taking a little bit of that authority away from Elon Musk. But it's notable that he went on to say that Musk would still be directly involved and would still be advising these departments. And so this was a very lengthy statement. And I think the thing that stuck out to me, Liz, was that he said we will now be using a scalpel instead of a hatchet. But he's already used the hatchet. We have been reporting extensively on the tens of thousands of federal workers who have already lost their jobs. So while we continue to see sort of a walk back from these mass terminations, in many cases, the damage has already been done. But now we'll have to see moving forward just how much Elon Musk is involved with every department.
Weijia, before you go, I want to circle back to Ukraine and Russia, because earlier today the president said on Truth Social that there could be sanctions against Russia. What options are on the table here when it comes to sanctions against Russia, given this sort of complicated relationship we have here?
Well, and given the fact that there are already so many sanctions in place on Russia. But White House officials tell us that there are still many avenues to explore, and that includes sanctioning Russian oil, sanctioning banks that are currently not on the list, and sanctioning China for any business that they do with Russia. So there are more options on the table that he is willing to use if it gets to that, because again, in that same post, he was expressing frustration, Liz, about the ongoing violence and bombing in Ukraine, even though he is focused on an end and on brokering a peace deal.
Weijia Jiang live for us at the White House. Thanks so much for that insight, Weijia. All right, we are keeping an eye on the Dow as markets react to all of this breaking news from the White House today. President Trump's swerving tariff policy prompted a roller coaster on Wall Street, to say the least. The Dow is down nearly 3% this week. The Nasdaq entered correction territory. So let's bring in CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady. Kelly, when asked if we've seen the last of these on-again, off-again tariff policies, the president said, quote, "There will always be changes and adjustments." So what does the uncertainty mean for American businesses?
Yeah, this is the tough piece of this, because you have businesses that are looking at the situation. You know, one day it's a tariff, the next day there's a carve out, the next day the deadline has been pushed, and these businesses are having to make decisions about inventory, about hiring, all sorts of different things, and they're making it in a very uncertain environment. And that is also why you're seeing the market go up and down, because investors are having to make investment decisions, pick sectors and stocks where they want to put their money in that similarly uncertain environment. I think what was interesting that did come up today is this idea of reciprocal tariffs. It does look like there's going to be even more tit for tat with Canada. The president said as soon as today there could be a reciprocal tariff on Canadian lumber and dairy products. That's an interesting one, I felt, Liz, simply because Canada does not have a tariff on the U.S. It's that they subsidize their own domestic industry. But that does go back to the president's previous comments that tariff or non-tariff ways in order to keep out U.S. companies and industries from each of these nations he would be considering as a tariff. So very curious to see if that does indeed happen today. But yes, Liz, it does go back to this uncertain environment that businesses and investors and consumers are operating in.
Yeah, I can imagine. I want to talk about the new jobs data out today, Kelly, because Trump is touting a boost in manufacturing jobs. But remember, that boost comes at the same time as huge cuts to the federal government. So what can you tell us about that?
So this particular jobs report that we got today, it was adding 151,000, a little bit less than we expected, 170,000. But basically the headline was the jobs market is slowing, but I think there was a lot of relief that we didn't see something worse. When it comes to the DOGE cuts, specifically the government cuts, there were 10,000 less federal jobs that were open this month. But really the majority of these cuts that we're seeing over the past month or so, that's actually not going to show up in this report until the next month or two. It's really just about how the survey is done, when it's done, and how they classify this. But the president is right, and I actually just pulled this up before I hopped on with you. Over the past couple of months, we have seen manufacturing jobs drop. And even a year ago, same thing. This same month in 2024, we saw negative 13,000 manufacturing jobs. We saw an increase of 10,000 today, and that does go back to the tariffs. You have seen companies commit to moving that here, but one sector goes up, one sector goes down. You know, it really depends on how you sort of play out whether it's net positive or net negative.
Yeah, it's a roller coaster, as we said. We're on the ride. All right, Kelly O'Grady, thanks so much. All right, let's take our monitors now to Capitol Hill, where Congress not in session today, but the pressure is on lawmakers to pass a continuing resolution to fund the government. Today marks exactly 1 week until the deadline for that continuing resolution to be pushed through Congress. And Republicans have a slim majority to work with as House Speaker Mike Johnson works to whip those votes together. CBS News congressional correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns is joining us now with more on this. Does Johnson have enough support here to put this to a vote on the House floor, do you think?
That is the big question hovering over all of this. It feels like Groundhog Day again, where we are kind of going down to the wire here on funding the government and asking whether it will be open this time next week. Johnson has said we haven't seen the text of this legislation yet. We're waiting for the actual text of the bill. But he has said that he is going to put forward legislation that extends government funding through the end of September, which is the end of the fiscal year, at the levels currently, that current spending levels, which were decided by under the Biden administration. You do have a group of conservative lawmakers who don't like government spending, who want to see cuts to government spending, and who are usually averse to these kinds of short-term funding bills. But the White House, President Trump invited some of those members over this week to say, hey, look, just get this out of the way. You can have the fights on the bigger budget bill that comes later on. The big question is about Democrats. Will they cross the aisle and support this continuing resolution to not shut down the government? Or do they point the finger at Republicans and say, hey, you guys have the majority. You have to figure it out.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, also this just in, House Democrats released a letter opposing this continued resolution. What can you tell us about that letter?
Yeah, this is the letter from House Democratic leadership, Hakeem Jeffries, saying and urging Democrats not to support this. Basically, they are trying to make the argument that the bill would make cuts to important social safety net programs like Medicaid and others. But again, we haven't seen the text of this bill. There has been a broader argument about the overall budget plans from Republicans for the next fiscal year. Those have just been outlined so far, but there has been this report from the Congressional Budget Office, nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, saying in that budget, you called for cuts of over $800 billion. Those cuts can't be achieved unless you start to cut into Medicaid. And so that has caused a lot of alarm bells, and Democrats are really using that to point the finger at Republicans. Whether that's in this bill to continue funding the government, we just haven't seen the text yet. This is a broader argument about the overall plans from Republicans.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns live for us in Washington. Thanks so much, Caitlin. Have a great weekend. All right, still ahead, we are live in Selma, Alabama, where people are marking the anniversary of a historic moment in the fight for civil rights. You're watching CBS News 24/7. All right, we have an update on that lunar lander named Athena that touched down on the moon's surface yesterday. Images here show the lander there on its side, and officials say the lander's mission is over. This is the second landing attempt for Texas-based company Intuitive Machines. The first lander also ended up sideways. Today marks 60 years since Bloody Sunday in Selma, Alabama. On this day in 1965, hundreds of civil rights advocates gathered for a march for voting rights. They were marching from Selma to the state capital of Montgomery. But those demonstrators were met by police officers and state troopers who pushed them back, brutally beating some of them. The violence was condemned around the country and led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act later on that year. Let's go to CBS News correspondent Elise Preston. She is live in Selma, Alabama today with someone who was at that historic march 60 years ago. Elise?
Yeah, Liz, it has been surreal this whole day. We've been surrounded by people who were here 60 years ago. We're at the base of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, so the marchers would have come across this way. We're not able to go up that way right now at the moment because of security checks. But right here, we do have Miss Ruth Brown Anthony, who was here 60 years ago. And Miss Ruth, you were just 14 on the day of Bloody Sunday. tell me, first off, you got involved in the movement when you were just 9.
Yes.
Why?
I got involved in the movement when I was 9 because I didn't realize that there was a difference. But my mom went to the store. My mom and I went to the store, and she was getting ready to pay for her products, and 3 little white girls walked in. My mom had to step back and let those little girls get in front of her. That's the day I realized something is not right. That's when I got involved in wanting to do something to help our people get it right. We weren't about voting. It was about respect.
About respect.
Yes.
And I mean, you were only 9. I can't even imagine what went through your body and your mind, even though you walked us through that. But take us now to Bloody Sunday. You were 14. We have a picture. I'm not sure if we're able to share that with our viewers. We have a picture right before you all were getting ready to march. Oh, we do have the picture right here. Let's go ahead and show that to our viewers. It really shows just how young you were. You had a lollipop in your mouth. What were you thinking before the march started?
What I was thinking before that march started, like I did for every march, that it can make a difference. All I wanted to do was make a difference for our people because they couldn't do it. My mom couldn't march because she was afraid of losing her job. She was making $15 a week to feed 6 kids. And so they couldn't march. So I know I had to do it for my mom. Every march I went on was for my mom.
Yeah. And so you and your friends, you started to march across the bridge. Where were you when the violence broke out?
We were, I can't show.
Yeah, you were
right
right
in the middle of the bridge, where that arch is right there. We were in the middle of the bridge, excited.
Yeah.
You know, we getting ready to do something exciting. And all of a sudden, we got across the river and we saw a sea of blue. Not expecting to see that. And then John Lewis said, let's kneel and pray. We knelt down to pray, and while we were kneeling to pray, they came by with horses, and they started throwing canisters of tear gas. We just burst. I ended up by the river. I lost my friends who I was with. I came back up by myself. I ran across that with a horse, the man with the horse right beside me. I ran back to Brown Chapel Church. When I got to Brown Chapel Church, I fell in my mom's arm, and I asked her, how can one set of colored people hate us because another set of people because of the color of our skin? And I cried because I didn't understand it, you know.
Yeah. It's heartbreaking.
And it's still to this day, it's still emotional.
Yeah.
And like I said, 60 years later, I still get emotional about that day.
What emotions are you feeling today?
I feel sad. I really feel sad. I still feel sad because, you know, we can still march today for the same thing we marched for 60 years ago. Selma's back segregated. We're going through the same thing. They want to take our history away from us. And our history is American history. And so I feel sad that we marched for this and nothing happened. The same thing. We're right back where we started from.
And when you say we're right back where we started from, you are dedicated to telling your story, telling the story of the foot soldiers and everything that happened. This story cannot be forgotten.
It cannot be forgotten. That's why I tell the young kids today, I said, go talk to your elders and let them tell you what went on so you won't forget. Because a lot of kids think we made it. We hadn't made it. We still have a long way to go. And I don't want them to forget. Because, you know, if you forget, you tend to repeat. And I don't want them to forget the struggle we went through, starting at 9 years old. And they can go for the same thing today. I can march today for the same thing. We got to vote, but they sell it for a fish sandwich and a beer.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just sad. It breaks my heart, the struggle we went through, and to see it reverting back.
Yeah. Well, Miss Ruth, we thank you so much for sharing your story and your sentiments with us, and look forward to speaking with you more and other foot soldiers through the weekend as we mark 60 years since Bloody Sunday. Liz?
Elise, I'm speechless. I mean, it just takes your breath away hearing her story. At 14 years old, she was on that bridge marching with those people, and she witnessed that day and running into her mother's arms. And the fact she's able to speak about it today, her story should not be forgotten. Thank you so much for that report. And let's look at the backdrop. I mean, look at where you're standing. I mean, history was made right where you are 60 years ago. And remarkable report. Thank you so much. All right, let's switch back to space coverage. SpaceX reeling from its yet second straight failure this year after a launch went very wrong. Take a look.
It's a shooting star. No way. What is that?
That is SpaceX Starship rocket breaking apart and lighting up the night sky. The unmanned rocket lifted off yesterday in South Texas and then just exploded mid-flight. And according to SpaceX, it was a malfunction triggered by multiple engine shutdowns. Here's CBS News space consultant Bill Harwood.
Clearly there was something wrong, and then moments later, a camera on the rocket showed it beginning to, I'll say, spin out of control. I'm not really sure what the orientation of the vehicle was, but it was moving rapidly and not in a way you want in a spacecraft going to space.
NOAA released these satellite images of the launch and explosion as seen from space. Another rocket, SpaceX, exploded during a test launch back in January. The FAA ordered an investigation into that, and flights at several Florida airports were temporarily grounded because of the risk of falling debris. And even after the ground stop was lifted, it managed to cause delays at the airports in Miami and Fort Lauderdale. All right, I want to switch gears here for a moment because, Jess, you and I get questions all the time. How do we kind of cope with the just relentless stream of news, and how do we stay sane?
It's the behind the scenes that makes
ones like this.
Yeah. So our executive producer Jennifer, she is currently training this future service dog. His name is Scoop. The reason why I think this is important to note too, Canine Companions is such an amazing organization, and right now this puppy is in training, and she has been doing so good, and she's very chatty right now too.
She's such a good.
So she's going to do. Oh, she's eating my mic.
I can take her too if you'd like.
No,
oh, you want to do it here? See what happens.
Let's do the forecast.
I'll keep an eye.
We'll see how this one goes. We're going to pull up the map underneath me. Scoop is going to help me out. We're going to do a puppy walking forecast. How about we call it that? Now, throughout the South right now, we're catching a break, finally, right? Oh, it's the worst. We're catching a break from storms, but we have more as we head into this weekend's forecast early next week. We're actually going to recycle that one more time just to show you as we head all the way over here to areas like Salt Lake, Denver. We're watching storms sweep throughout this region right now. And take a look behind me. I want to time this system out. I cannot believe I'm doing this with a black lab in my hand. I am so happy right now on this Friday. As we head into this afternoon, it's up in the Northeast. If you have your pups out there, they're probably really annoyed with all the windy conditions we've been dealing with. We're under wind advisories right now throughout the Northeast. Scoop can confirm. Now we head all the way over into the Rockies, heading into the next couple days. See that storm system behind me? That will continue to track to the south. Scoop is agreeing with that too. All the way into this weekend we go. We are expecting to see widespread showers. All right, little one, you can go home. Scoop's gonna head off.
Oh, my baby.
And as we head into this weekend's forecast, we are expected to see more widespread showers all the way down into Florida, pushing throughout the south. And we're going to clear up on the back end as we head into early next week. But one thing to mention, too, those wind alerts are still in effect right now, issued by the National Weather Service, widespread throughout the Northeast, with gusts anywhere up to around 60 miles per hour. We can see gusty conditions there, and we continue to monitor this closely because this impacts New York, Boston, all the way up into Portland, Maine, just into our Friday afternoon forecast. These gusty conditions, the storm system alone originated back in Texas just a couple days ago, and now this wind event is all the way up into the Northeast. We monitor that closely. And last thing to mention, too, from the past couple days, since Tuesday, we've seen 24 inches of snow in areas like Michigan, and we continue to keep a close eye on that because they are gearing up for some more cool conditions this weekend. Our windstorm alerts, of course, or the winter storm alerts, excuse me, anywhere from Utah over into parts of Colorado and down into northern parts of Arizona and New Mexico. That's the big concern right now. So we keep a close eye on that. I'm just delaying real fast because Liz is about to come back on with Scoop. And
I'm with a little puppy now. She almost left us, but we felt like you guys at home need to see her one more time because she's just that cute. Because sometimes
she's a sweetheart.
You just got to show some puppy video. You
know
what I mean?
100%. Am I supposed to take her now? Because I will.
I think, you know what? I think you guys are friends, and she's looking at you saying, hey, Jess, we got to see each other one more time.
This is the Friday that we needed here, by the way.
I think this is the Friday we all need. We'll be right back. You're watching CBS News 24/7. Welcome back to to CBS News 24/7. I want to take you now to New Mexico, where we are expecting an update on the mysterious deaths of actor Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arkawa, and their dog. They were all found dead on February 26. Betty's body showing signs of mummification. And now investigators with the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office are expected to give an update this afternoon. I want to bring in Carter Evans. He's live in Santa Fe, New Mexico with the very latest on this. Carter, bring us up to date. What do we know so far?
Well, first of all, we're hoping to get some definitive answers today on cause of death. We know very little so far. We know the circumstances that they were found in. We know that Gene Hackman was found in the mudroom of his house, his cane and sunglasses nearby, possibly suggesting some sort of fall. His wife, Betsy Arakawa, found in a bathroom, some pills scattered on the counter. Now they did talk about the types of pills that they found. They said it was Tylenol, thyroid medication, blood pressure medication, that sort of thing. So we know the autopsies have been completed right now. They don't show any signs of external trauma. So right now they don't appear, or foul play doesn't appear to be involved. But, you know, the sheriff, when they found these bodies, said it was suspicious enough to warrant investigation. One important piece of evidence that they do have, and they did have initially, was Gene Hackman's pacemaker. It stopped working on February 17th. Now, they were found on the 26th, and what that suggests is that he was dead for possibly as many as 9 days.
And Carter, what do we know about Gene Hackman's children? Had they played a role at all in this investigation?
Well, you know, I'm sure they've been talking with investigators. He has a few children, and one of them, Leslie, put out a statement that she hadn't talked to her daughter. She hadn't talked to her father in a couple of months, but that was not uncommon for them. That was the kind of relationship they had. The couple was kind of reclusive. They kept to themselves. Hopefully, investigators will be able to get some information about what the couple was going through, if anything was happening in the family, from the children, and hopefully we'll find out if they did today.
All right, we'll look forward to that news conference. Carter Evans, thank you so much for that report.
Sure.
All right, coming up for the first time, we are seeing some key evidence in the case against Brian Kohberger, the man accused of killing 4 University of Idaho students more than 2 years ago. The evidence is a chilling series of texts sent by 2 other people who were inside the house at the time of the murders. Jonathan Vigliotti has more.
The unsealed texts shared between the 2 surviving roommates reveal 17 frantic messages. According to the text, one of them feared a man with a ski mask was in their home around the time of the killings of Madison Mosion, Kaylee Gonzalez, Zaina Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin took place. The 2, who were in separate bedrooms, texted between 4:22 and 4:24 a.m. and placed unanswered phone calls to all 4 victims between 4:19 and 4:27 a.m. No one is answering, texted one of the roommates, identified as DM, to BF, adding, "I'm really confused." DM then texted the phone of roommate Gonzalez, saying, "Kaylee, what's going on?" DM sent another text to BF, writing about the intruder's appearance, saying, quote, "like a ski mask almost, and that he had something over his head and mouth." She goes on to tell BF, "I'm not kidding. I am so freaked out." Then BF tells DM, "Come to my room. Run. Down here." The messages come as a 911 call from the morning of the killings was also made public for the first time. The call, made by BF, came about 8 hours after the text message exchange. It's unclear why they waited so long to call for help. During it, she tells the operator that she found one of her roommates, Zaina Kernodle, unconscious and, quote, "believe she got drunk last night." She also tells the dispatcher that a man was in their home. Brian Kohberger was arrested 6 weeks later in connection with the case, and a judge entered a not guilty plea to all charges on his behalf. CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson.
The text messages are really about painting a broader picture for the jury.
The trial is expected to begin in August, where both survivors are expected to be critical witnesses. I'm Jonathan Vigliotti.
Coming up, breaking news out of New York City, where the Trump administration has just canceled hundreds of millions of dollars in federal grants and contracts to a top university. You're watching CBS News 24/7. To South Carolina now, where the first execution by firing squad in 15 years is set to take place. Brad Sigmund was convicted of killing his ex-girlfriend's parents in 2001. He'll step into the death row chamber tonight. CBS News correspondent Meg Oliver explains what to expect with this type of execution and why it's so unusual.
Tonight, for the first time, South Carolina will carry out the death penalty by a firing squad. The state adopted the method in 2021, in part because it was having a hard time getting drugs for lethal injection. And some companies didn't want to sell the drugs unless they were kept anonymous, which wasn't allowed at the time. So here is what is expected to happen tonight. At 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, 67-year-old Brad Sigmund, who was convicted of brutally murdering his ex-girlfriend's parents with a baseball bat and admitted to it, has chosen to die by a firing squad. He will be strapped in a metal chair with a hood over his head and a target over his heart. About 15 feet away, hidden behind a wall, 3 correctional officers have volunteered for this job. They will step up and fire through a small opening. Witnesses will be behind bulletproof glass, including 3 members of the media. When Sigmund is declared dead, those members of the media will come out and hold a brief press conference to describe what they saw. This will mark only the 4th execution by a firing squad in the last 48 years. The other 3 happened in Utah. South Carolina says they do not consider this cruel and inhumane because they give the death row inmate the choice to choose among the electric chair, lethal injection, and now a firing squad. Back to you.
Meg, thank you so much. Breaking today, the Trump administration has decided to cancel $400 million in federal grants and contracts to Columbia University. The move comes after the New York college faced intense scrutiny over its alleged failure to protect Jewish students. The grants in question come from the Department of Health and Human Services, the U.S. General Services Administration, and the Department of Education. Now, if you remember, pro-Palestinian protests led the school to move classes online back in April and eventually cancel their main graduation in August. That same month, the university president resigned. The man accused of attempting to assassinate President Trump is in a Florida courtroom today for a status hearing. This was the 2nd attempt on Trump's life. Ryan Ruth was found hiding inside shrubbery with a rifle near Trump's golf club in West Palm Beach. Ruth's trial, as of now, is set for September. Still ahead, we hear from the Pope in his own words 3 weeks into his hospitalization. We'll have that audio for you when we come back. You're watching CBS News 24/7. Let's take you to New Mexico, where a death has been linked to the growing measles outbreak. Authorities there say an unvaccinated adult tested positive after they died, but the official cause of death is still under investigation. This follows the first death in a decade from measles when a child died in West Texas last week. And this morning, Texas leads the nation in measles cases with nearly 200 total cases. CBS News correspondent Omar Villafranca is in Tarrant County, Texas, with the latest on the outbreaks.
The latest numbers for the Texas measles outbreak came out, and the state is now at 198 confirmed cases, a majority of them, 137 in far west Texas in Gaines County. And the state says that it's a small Mennonite community there that is really being impacted. Now, we were in Gaines County and talked to a doctor at Seminole Hospital, Seminole Memorial Hospital there, who's treated the Mennonite community there for years. And he said it's hitting the children there, unvaccinated children in that Mennonite community, the hardest. And he said, of course, as a doctor, he wants to build a relationship with his patients, and he's had the conversations about getting the measles vaccine. But he points, these are hardworking people, but they're very weary of Western medicine, and he says it's just not going to happen. That's something that, of course, he has to deal with there, being on the front lines. And what was interesting in our conversation with him is that he's been working for almost 30 years in far west Texas, and he has never seen a measles case until this year. So, of course, a lot of the physicians in the area are trying to work through that, what that means. There has been 1 death in the state of Texas, an unvaccinated child of school age. Also, New Mexico reported in Lee County, which is just over the border from Texas, one death there, an unvaccinated adult. We don't know if it's a male or female, or if it's directly related to the outbreak in West Texas. But right now, 2 deaths have been reported. This is a story that is developing and is updated weekly, so we'll keep an eye on it. But doctors say they're very aware and keeping an eye on it and see how it spreads across the state. Back to you.
Omar, thanks so much. Well, the economy and immigration are 2 of the biggest issues on the minds of so many Americans these days, but we rarely get a look behind the scenes to see how these 2 key forces in American life intersect. CBS News Racing Culture and CBS News Reports reveal the connection between immigration and food prices by following the journey of the people, both legal and undocumented, bringing America's milk to market.
Can your farm survive, John, without immigrants?
No. It would be the end of dairy farming here. I would have to adjust my life somehow, and I'm not sure I could do it, but I'll have to.
Now, to learn more about the connection between immigrant workers and dairy prices, watch CBS Reports, the new documentary, The Price of Milk, premiering this Sunday on CBS News 24/7 and Paramount Plus. The Vatican says the Pope is remaining stable. Today, the pontiff hit the 3-week mark in his hospitalization for double pneumonia. And in an audio message broadcasted to St. Peter's Square earlier today, he thanked people in his native Spanish for their prayers.
Agradezco de todo corazón las oraciones que hacen por mi salud desde la plaza.
It's notable how soft Pope Francis' voice was in that recording. CBS News foreign correspondent Chris Livesay reports he is stable enough that his next update won't be until tomorrow.
Well, the fact that Pope Francis can make this audio recording is indeed an encouraging sign. Him addressing the people who have been gathering now for 2 weeks on a nightly basis here behind me in St. Peter's Square to recite the rosary and pray for the pontiff, who has been hospitalized for 3 weeks for double pneumonia. Initially, it was just a bad case of bronchitis, and it's since devolved into something much worse, which you can hear in his voice as he makes this recording. At times he comes across as breathless, but also just exhibiting his gratitude for the people who have been praying for him nonstop ever since. Now, according to the Vatican, he remains in stable condition. He hasn't had any more instances of this acute respiratory insufficiency like he suffered twice back earlier this week when doctors had to intervene and aspirate mucus from his air passageways, reflecting just a level of transparency that we're not used to at the Vatican when it comes to a Pope's health. But Pope Francis has instructed his doctors and the Vatican to be as transparent as possible. His prognosis remains guarded, meaning we still don't know if or when he's going to be discharged from the hospital and if he's going to get better or worse. Keep in mind, he is an 88-year-old man suffering from double pneumonia, and one of his lungs is already impaired. He had part of it removed when he suffered from pneumonia as a very young man. So it remains a very serious situation for Pope Francis. Back to you.
Chris, thank you so much. To Paris now, where train services are slowly coming back after an unexploded World War II bomb was found near the tracks. Authorities canceled all high-speed trains today running between Paris and London, Brussels and Belgium. Crews digging up dirt during a renovation found the explosive. Bomb disposal experts were brought in to defuse the device, which weighs more than 1,000 pounds. All right, let's bring you back to the States now, where 4 stories of scaffolding completely collapsed on the side of a Boston building. Firefighters said that they believe strong winds tore it all down. Check out the damage, though. Debris, including wood, tarp, and piping, crushed 2 cars on the street below it. 4 people were inside that building, but thankfully no one was hurt. All right, we got much more ahead here on CBS News 24/7. Authorities set to give an update later on this afternoon on the mysterious death of actor Gene Hackman and his wife in their Santa Fe, New Mexico home. And a live look at the White House, which is hosting its first ever crypto summit right now. We'll bring you President Trump's remarks to crypto industry leaders. Plus, a team of astronauts are arriving in Florida, where excitement is building for blastoff. We hear from the crew about their upcoming mission to the International Space Station. Stay with us right here on CBS News 24/7.